guess we start. Okay. Let's go back. I want to fill in some things. In Mitzvah Kufla mit Ches, Hi Shetzivonu Lohashiv Hakal Koyos. And we see about this word. This is Alamach, and it's basically Chush. And we'll see that to translate it as only kalka is probably a mistake as you read through the mitzvah, because the Rambam says later in the mitzvah that he says u'shachatzeres labatim habinuyis besodos acha she'enam benuyim b'toich hachoyma hine dinam din hapades vasodos vaginois b'shaveh. So there's no din that you need kalka. It's even batim. The problem is that batim in a botei in a mukefes choyma has different dinim. So then the proper translation over here, what it should be is lashuv yochush. Okay, hanim keres kulam b'shon azeis ladoneim v'tzeis mitachas yara koinim b'loy pidyon v'om yisale. B'chol eretz dula titn la'oretz. U'bir lonu shezeis ha'gu'ula tiyeh b'shana hazeis, which means yovel. V'omer b'shnas hayovel hazeis toshuvu ish al achuz aseh. So it says like this, and then he continues, Ukva dikte kakosuv b'mitzvazo v'bia eich yiyeh din hamoiche v'akoine k'shir tzaliftois nachlos ha'nenkeres koydem egia shnas hayovel. Ubia oid shadin hazeh miyuch b'kakoyos. So it means that somehow there's a some type of relationship, at least something that some relate between gu'ulois kalka in yovel and the option of pidyon kalka of gu'ula b'toich yovel to pay with the increment of what you owe until yovel. The relationship a priori is odd because Geula, what we're talking about is that it goes back below pidyon. And here you need to pay. And it is also odd why the Rambam should classify and bring these dinim here when he discusses the mitzvah of gula b'lei pidyon, and here there is pidyon. What I think the Rambam did, and this I want to show you, the Rambam used interesting word over here in ukva diktek akosuv b'mitz, and he's very clear that it's b'mitzvazu. Okay, but the word diktek, I'm not sure exactly how to translate it, but it's in the original Judeo Arabic, it's tifke. It's the verb of the word fikah, which we had in the seventh Shiur. And I just want to show you how the Rambam uses. I want to trace, which I spent this morning trying to do, to trace the Rambam's approach to fikah. We discussed in Shiur Shvi what fikah was. That the Rambam says that various, whatever Mishpah, din, we don't know exactly how to translate fikr. We'll see exactly. We'll see somewhat as we go on. That, for example, in Korban Leviyered, you have Ashirus and Dalus and Dale Dalus. You don't count it as 3 mitzvahs, you count it as 1 mitzvah. Okay? So, the Ram says basically that the Achzoris Hasodeh within the other years that are not Yovel is somehow related and a fikr to this mitzvah. Okay, now I want to explain what's going on. I want to start with examples. I'll tell you the basic structure, and then we'll see exactly how everything fits or doesn't fit together. Thinking again about Shurish Zion, there are basically 2 cases or 2 categories of cases, which a priori, I don't understand 100% what the relationship is, okay? The case which I mentioned of Ashirus, Dalus, and Dale Dalus, L'chera is 3 different ways you can mekayim the mitzvah of Korban Leviyered. Either you bring it as an Ashir, or you bring it as an Ani, or as an Ani who's in dire straits, Dale Dalus. The same way that discussion that there is a mitzvahs yibum and a mitzvahs chalitza, and a priori, had it not been that the Torah, that the Chazal told you explicitly that it's 2 mitzvahs, you would have assumed that there are 2 ways, there are 2 things to do when you have a Yavama. You can either do Yibum or Chalitza. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is the first example, if my recollection is correct, the first example that the Rambam gives of fikr in Shurish Zion, he basically says that there are many mishpatim and dinim in Yibum and Chalitza. And you have a list of Elu Choltzos Umiyabnois, Elu Choltzos Lo Miyabnois, Elu Eno Choitzos Umiyabnois, Ve'elu Eno Choitzos Ve'eno Miyabnois. Okay? And the Ram says all these things are fikr. And if you would have counted fikr, you would have counted these. Now you understand yourself that these are not different ways to mekayim the mitzvah, but they're mishpatim when the mitzvah is noeg and when the mitzvah is not noeg. In this woman, with this man, the mitzvah is noeg. The yibum is noeg, the chalitza is noeg, and you can mix and match depending upon the status of the various of the yavam and the yavama. Okay. And the Rambam gives another example of which would fit into this category. The Rambam seems to equate the 2. It's an amazing thing. He has, and it's a whole new take on the din of Golus of Witzeach B'Shoigeg. He says the whole parsha of Witzeach B'Shoigeg has 15 mitzvahs which are various fikr. And he says, for example, V'im b'kli baziliko v'itzechu mos yomos. So I would have said v'itzechu mos yomos, as we always learn that he's chayiv misis, the chalitzeach. The Rambam l'chur doesn't learn like that in Pshuta Shamikra, and he says v'itzechu. I think what he's doing, it's a fikr of when and how you're noyeg ritzeich b'shkoga. Okay? And in this case, he's not goyla. But he's at the mercy of the goyal adam. And he's learning that he's a shoygei korov lemezid. He's not chayiv misa, but there's no golus. So there are 15 cases going back and forth of elu goylin or elu enon goylin. There's goyal adam, goylin enon goylin enon goylin. So these are not various ways l'chayr to mekayim the mitzvah. But the question is the mitzvah noeg or is it not noeg? I would have assumed. Unless you want to tell me, you see, the question is, how can you imagine a mitzvah which the Mitzvas Aseh to tell you something is not noeg? Like, eno chaytz v'eno miyabos. But this is what he does. It's an amazing thing. And I want to show you, at least, let's do the Mitzvas Aseh, how the Rambam has two different categories. Sometimes he quotes at the Fiqh the categories that there are two different ways of Mekayim the mitzvah. And I think this case over here of Geula, that both the Torah calls both Geula, and Geula doesn't necessarily mean there's a Geula without pidyon, which is on Yovel. There's a Geula with pidyon, which happens Shah Shnei Ashikul. And these are two different ways to Mekayim the mitzvah, like Korban Levi. Okay. And let's now try to see. I just want to show you how this goes. I'm not sure 100% what happens over here because I'm not sure what the segue between these two types of fiqh are. But for example, you have it like this. You look at Mitzvas Aseh Lamed Hey, the Mitzvas Aseh Shemen HaMishcha, he starts off and he says the mitzvah is that the Shemen HaMishcha, we should have it for Dvar Mitzlachem Boy. And then he uses the Fiqh to talking about the Meshicha of Kohen Gadol, the Meshicha of Melech, and the Meshicha of Klisharis. So what the Ram has done, an amazing thing, is somehow coming to the conclusion, which he comes in Shoresh Asiri and the Minyan HaKotze, that the mitzvah of Shemen HaMishcha is Meshicha. But it's not only Meshicha, it's the Mekayim, the Shemen HaMishcha, and also Meshicha. And there's three different ways to Mekayim the mitzvah. There's the Meshicha of Kohen Gadol, the Meshicha of Melech, and the Meshicha of Klisharis. And that's what I'm using the word Fiqh in Mitzvah Lamed Hey. In Mitzvah Nun Zayin, he basically says Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni should have basically been Fiqh and one mitzvah because they're two different ways to Mekayim the mitzvah Kol Pesach. Either in Nisan or in Iyar. And somehow the Matiki Ashmur said that they're separate. So Memela, you count them as two mitzvahs. But had it not been for what Chazal said, you'd have counted them as one mitzvah, minyan mitzvahs. That's what he says in Aseh Nun Zayin. Then is Mitzvas Aseh Pei Beis. And Arifa, it's called Arifas Petach Hamor. Basically, Arifa and Pidyon of Petach Hamor should have been one mitzvah. And Fiqh, two different ways of what to do after the dinim of B'chol Behemoth Tmeah. So come the Chazal and the Mishnah B'cheres, it says mitzvahs Arifa and mitzvahs Pidyon, that it's two separate mitzvahs. In Mela, we don't look at it as Fiqh. So in Mela, it's two mitzvahs, minyan mitzvahs. That's what he says in Pei Beis. Then, I think he's doing the same thing in Tiglachas Tuma of Nazir. And he mentions it twice in Mitzvah Tzadi Gimel and in Kuf Yud Aleph, that it's a fikah of Nazirus. There are two types of Nazirus. You can Mekayim Nazirus Tumah, and Nazirus Tahara. And Nazirus Tumah is part and parcel of the Kiyum of Nazirus. Now, interesting, I think this goes in this group, Mitzvas Aseh Kuf Ches, you have Mechatos. The Ram says, in Mechatos, it's basically has two parts of it. It's that the Mechatos are Metamin and Metaharin. It's basically like a segue between the mitzvahs that are coming up is the various ways of Tahara, which are Mikvah and Tyrus at Mitzvah. This is the first of the three. And it's also the last of all the mitzvahs of Tumah, of Tumas Nevela and Tumas Sheretz and whatever, okay? So comes the Rambam and says that there's fikeh here. And I think what the fikeh is that there are various ways of that they're metame and the mechatos and the various ways that they're metayeh. That's what I think. I'm not 100% sure if it fits in this category, but he calls it fikah in mechatos. Then, in Kuftes, he has another fikah when he's talking about Tahara of mikvah. He says there's also a Tahara of Mayim Noivim, which have different dinim. Mayim Chaim doesn't have a Shiur, and there are two ways to be Mekayim this mitzvah mikvah. You can either do it through a mikvah with memsa and mayim shuvim, or through mayim zechlim. Okay. Then you have in mitzvah kuf chav ches ma'aseh sheni, and includes in ma'aseh sheni not only the afrosha but also the avol Yerushalayim, and also the pidyon in Richuk Mokot. So what comes out, he says, however, if the Bailan do a pidyon, it's Chayiv Chomesh. So the Hisofas Chomesh, l'chayre, is another expression of how you mekayim the mitzvah Ma'aseh Sheni, I assume. Okay? And then in Reish Yud Zayin, he uses it by chalitza, but it's not lamaisa because chalitza is a separate mitzvah because of the Matiki Ashmur, the Mishnah B'Cheres says mitzvah chalitza, mitzvah yibum. Now, here, I want to tell you another case, the other type. Remember, we said that in Hörig, B'Shogeg, you are goyler, you're not goyler, and they are thick of the mitzvah. I don't know, is the I'm trying to say is a kiyum of the parsha by not being goyler, or it's when the mitzvah not noeg, or the same type of thing they did, Eilu Choitzes, the enemy Yabos. So by not being misyabim, that's what the parasha says. That's what you should be doing. I'm not sure what happens, but he has many cases like this, and he equates them. Now, for example, Mitzvahs Aseh Tzadiches, Tumas Eichlu Mashkin. So I assume there are times that it is metame, the mashkin and the oichlin, at times that it's not metame. So I assume that's what's happening. I could have imagined, that's what I'm not sure, mechatos could have been an example where you could say, here it's metayeh, here it's not metayeh. I'm not sure what he wants at fikah. You could have put mechatos possible in this category. And next, mitzvah kuvov, he has fikah into mazava. So I assume it means sometimes the zavo is metame, and sometimes it's not metame. And what the Ram calls here, you see here the translation of mishpat, the Ram in Shirish Zion uses the word mishpat when he talks about, he says the Torah uses the mishpat when he talks about the various a priori mitzvahs of fikah, of golus, he says, al piyah mishpatim ha'eli. He says, you see the Torah says mishpatim, and not mitzvahs. So there's mishpatim of zavo, and there's mishpatim of tumas erchel mashkin, and there's mishpatim of Eved Ivri in Reish Lamed Beis, how the dinim Eved Ivri express themselves, and there's mishpatim of Pidyon Omer Ivriya, that's Reish Lamed Hey, and Reish Lamed Vav, the mishpatim of Chayil Mazik, Nezikin, and Asrei Reish Lamed Zayin, mishpatim Shor, fikah of Shor. Then in Asrei Reish Lamed Ches, Bo, Reish Mem Hever, Reish Mem Aleph is Eish, Reish Mem Dalet is Shoel. When the dinim is Shoel, how they're noyig. When there's this or that, okay. So I'm not sure. You know, in this case he's chayiv, in this case he's potter. But maybe, I'm not sure exactly how you do it. Do you say that, or maybe you say that in this case, for example, in Mesa Machmas Malacha, so he's potter. Not Mesa Machmas is chayiv. Excuse me, Mesa Machmas is potter, correct, as I said. Correct. Now, so what I see here, and I thought every single one of them, I just went to the Mitzvas Aseh, we have to do again at some time the Lois Aseh, but they can fit into two categories. And I think the most important question, which I do not know the answer to, and I'm frank with you, I don't know the answer to, is the Ram seems to equate the two. And the question is, the two types of fikah, the one that the mitzvah is noeg or not noeg, and one that you're makayim the mitzvah this way, that way, or this way. So I can understand the mitzvah is noeg this way or that way or this way, that I understand. But how do you talk about when you would understand mitzvahs as doing something, as that the mitzvah is not noeg, that's also in the mitzvah. That l'chayre is zany. So my thoughts on this. Okay, this l'chayre is like, my thought is the following, and maybe I'm just, I don't know, maybe I'm just, hallucinating. If you recall, when we were talking about Shurana or religious law or psukim the Torah that avoirah, that the din is kach or din is kach, and we decided you can understand from inference a tzivui to act according to the psukim in the Torah. That's a shrana. And Lemaisi is, for example, when the Rambam talks about Golus, he talks about in Shiur Zion, it's the din of Golus. Okay? And maybe when you have a mitzvah, which is basically a din, and the Torah says to do like the din, so maybe you can imagine to do that the din doesn't apply. In other words, if you're supposed to do something and there's a tzivui, I understand this is absolutely ridiculous. How do you talk about it? But if basically we're talking about dinim, and that's the Ram talks, the Hebrew translation is mishpat. So the mishpat is this way in Golus, and maybe there's no Golus. The mishpat is that way, or the mishpat could have been in Yibum this way or that way, and maybe that's what's going on. And if you notice, most of these cases of it is noig and not noig are basically most of the group called dinim of Bo, Shor, Hever, Shoel, the dinim lodun. And to be lodun, in this case, it applies. That's what the Torah said. In this case, it doesn't apply. That's what I would suggest. And maybe I have no clue what's going on. So then the equation is clear because it's a kiyum. See, when you get the impression, the question is, what does it do with the mitzvah? It means the mitzvah doesn't apply. But if you assume there's a kiyum of the shrana, doing according to the din, and the din says it doesn't apply, so maybe you can equate the two. If that's correct, it's amazing. Okay, that's just wanted to just show you. I thought just the way we did this like an amazing overview. This was this morning's work, and I'm not sure if I'm there or not, but that's what it is. I think I mentioned to you that the Rambam has completely veered away from, I think last week in Mishnah Torah, this whole idea that pidyon kalka, b'shayimei hayovel, is part of this mitzvah of geula, and he puts in a separate parak, in parak Yud Aleph, and I can understand why he separates the two, but again, I have no clue of why you shouldn't make it a separate mitzvah. Because if you're ready to make it's a paush in the Torah, and it doesn't have an address. So we understood that the Torah, as the Ram says in Sadi Hey, that if you have the Torah is the kosuv is osach bo upirish dineha, that itself is reason to make a mitzvah called aforos nedarim. And the same way you could have made a mitzvah of pidyon of stei achuza in shnei yimei shnei hayovel. So I'm a little bit confused over here. Okay, now, okay. And that's the Ram here, Derech Hag is very careful that he says, Ukva diktek hakosu b'mitzvah. That means the Torah has various ways that the mitzvah is kaim. It's like Korban Yored. And maybe it's all the same. The pasuk says, here you are Makayim. I don't know if it's best in the Makayim the mitzvah, not Makayim the mitzvah. Here the mitzvah applies, here the mitzvah doesn't apply. Here you're Makayim the mitzvah, you're not Makayim. But it's all a kiyum of the mitzvah if you look at it as psukim in the Torah and Shrana. Another point, here the Rambam says, Shadin hazeh miyuchad b'kalkoyos, shehein chutz l'choymes hamedina. Here the kalkoyos l'chayra is also lav dafka kalkoyos, because anything which is outside of the Medina, of the Botei Rechoyma, has a din of stei achuzo. Shachatzeres labatim habenuyim besodois. The only exception is benuyim b'toch hachoyma. Hine dinom dina pardesa vaginas b'shoga. It's all the same, and it's a din of stei achuza, no matter what. The heim botei hachatzerim, the batim, they're bonui, but they're chatzerim. They're not in the mukefes choyma. Shoma ben hakosu, al stei ha'oretz yichoshev, Gula tiyeloi uba yovel yetze. So it's also gula. So the Torah has the word gula. The mitzvah is gula. And I'm not sure exactly, because when the pasuk says ubechol eretz achuzaschem gula titnu la'oretz, is the tzivui is the titnu to give a gula. I'm just not sure what the mitzvah is, because here again, yeah, because here in Mina Kotzer, Kuf Lamed Ches, Litein Gu'ula La'oretz. So just so here's the same, he's using the same phrase, Litein Gu'ula La'oretz. What does it mean to give? Is it really din, or it's actually, so what do you do? Because it goes back memela. So what are you supposed to do here? You see, in the pidyon, I understand, that's the gula. But what's the litein? What's the ma'aseh mitzvah? Because it goes back memela. What, you're supposed to act according to the din? And you say, what do? You go over to the government and say, oh, you have it. Right? So the question is, what's the ma'aseh mitzvah? Or the ma'aseh mitzvah is to act according to the din. Okay? So that just to bang it a little bit, that gives you the idea of what's happening here. Because if you look again at the other pasuk, that the Ram quotes, B'shnas hayovel azois toshuvu ish ala chuzasoi. Okay, so let's say that it's in the second person, Barabim. Who is it on? It's on the Bailim. But the Bailim is supposed to come back to his toshuvu ish ala chuzasoi. So what does that mean exactly? Just to go there, to pick the thing, do a kinyan chazaka? To act as if he's the Bailim? You see, in the case of Geula, it's much more simpler. You actually take money, in Geula Shashni, you actually take money and you buy something, but maybe the mitzvah on both to accept it, but to give it back, we don't know. So here, for example, the last pasuk which he quotes, Al stay ha'oretz yechoshev, because these botei chatzerim are like sodos, gu'ula tihi eloi. It's very, it's nothing you put your finger on. It's just the din should apply. Tihi eloi. Ubayovel yetze. It's a fact. So what's the din? The mitzvah is to be noye according to the fact. By Yovel yetze, he's not doing anything. It says it goes out. It's going on the sada, the botei chatzerim. Now, Kuf Lametes. Kuf Lametes. He shetzivonu sheyiyeh pidyon lekalkoyos hanimkorim toich choimas hamedina ad toim shona levad. Ad toim shona levad. See here, the pidyon kalkoyos here is alamach, the same word that the Rambam uses in Kuf Lamed Ches, and the same word that he uses again in the Ashora of Chanaya to a Nochri in Kalka. That is Loisasem Nun Aleph. Okay? Use the same. Now, when you're talking here, you have to understand that the Alamach is certainly not Kalka, because Kalka b'toicha has a din of stei achuzah. So here you have to interpret as l'chush and kinyan or something like that. Okay? In the case before, I also, in Kuf Lamed Ches, I would interpret as l'chush or kinyan for a very simple reason. Because it's lav dafka kalka, because any binyan botei chatzerim are also b'chlal. And also, it means what they call in Gemara Lashon, Gemara Sprach, what they call it, nichse deloi naide. Okay? Because when you talk about giving a goy chanoye bekalka, in the lav, the Rambam Perek Yud of Hilchos Avodah Zarah Halacha Gimel, ein moichin lohem batim sodos be'eretz Yisrael. So there, Ibn Tibbon doesn't say kalka. I think he says nachlo. He sheziranu mehoishev oivdei avodah zarah be'artzenu k'shaluba me'bekifilosam misale lo yeshuva be'avois v'atzcha pen yachti oischa v'chulei v'ulam oivdei avodah zarah lo yishkon imonu v'lo nimko loy nachalo v'loy naskir. What nimkoloi nachalo nachalo? We're talking about any type of nichse loy naide. So they're all the same. The translations might be different from the translators. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is. I think the important thing is to keep in mind what the dinim are. That's what he said. Bebeya lonu haperush loisitim lohem chanoye bekalka. L'chayr means mechuba or not mechuba. Now, here the Ram continues. He's the one shiyeh pidyon lekalkoyes hanikos teich chaymas hamedina. That's in Botei Chayma. Ad toim shona levad. Va'acha shona yiskaimu lekoina. So there are basically two parts to it. One part is you have the option of pidyon, And the other part is afterwards, it doesn't go back and it stays by the koina, okay? And both of them together are the mitzvah. And this is parallel to the last mitzvah. That the other mitzvah, there's a certain time that you have the option of doing gula, okay? And after that time, that option doesn't exist, whether it goes back memela as the mitzvah before, or it stays by the koina. That is depends upon what it is. And then the Rambam says, "V'acha ashona yiskaimu l'koina v'lo yetzei b'yovel." Okay, this lo yetzei b'yovel is a pasuk Chof Hei Lamed in Vayikra. V'im lo yigal ad melois lo shona tmimo v'kom habayis asher bo'ir asher lo choimo latzmises lakrino isoi l'doiroisov lo yetzei b'yovel. You understand over here, the lo yetzei b'yovel is not an ashara, it's a shlila. It does not go out b'yovel. Okay. And l'chera, by not going out, that's a kiyum of the mitzvah. Because the mitzvah is two things. I don't know if this is a shrana or what it is, how it fits in the last conversation before, but sometimes it can go out with pidyon, okay, and it doesn't go out, and that is part of the mitzvah, that it doesn't go out. Now, the Shona Shlema, he says, Hamedina Atayim Shona Levad. So what's the Tayim HaShona? So you do find a sugi in Eichin, Tana Abonon Yud Chesem Beis, Shona Amura Bekochim, Shona Amura Bebote Oichema, Shtei Shonim Shebesad Stei Achuza, V'Shei Shonim Shebe'eved Ivri, V'chein Shebebein U'Shebebas, Kulam Me'es Leis. Shona Amura Bebote Oichema, Tichsiv Atayim Shona Memkoroi. Memkoroi Shaloi V'loi Shona L'Minyan Oilam. So the question is, what's the Shona Shlema? Or Taim, the Ram's Taim Shona Levad. So Taisen neither, a Mem Zayin Beis, Kula Meis Leis, Beper Shen Zvachim, Omar, the show's places Bekochim, V'chein Bebote Chayma. It's the hour. Okay? It means you look at the clock, and you see what hour it is. It's not from second to second. It's mishah l'shah. Okay? Shah is placed, you look at that, yeah, it's a very important observation. Shah is placed b'kochim, it's the hour. Okay? And I also assume, if I'm not mistaken, I came to the conclusion that Vestos are also like that. It's the Shah. Okay? In other words, the question is, what's the smallest halachic time frame? Okay? I understand in Kiddush HaChodesh you have halakim and you have various things that Chazal did, but the question is, in Teira, Shebiksa, in Teira, what exactly it is. Okay? So maybe it's a Shah. Okay. So Taisa says the Shahs apply also to Bot Erechim. However, Taisa in Erchin, Miyoim Liyoim, you can look at this taste. I'm not getting involved because the difference in taste in Eichin, and Lamed Aleph, Lamed Aleph, and tastes in neither. Okay. The Rambam does not quote here Me'es Le'es by Boter Chayma. However, he quotes it by Eilchin in Perek Aleph Halacha Daled, and shows Lagabe Kochim and Ma'aseh Karbonos Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel. So what is the Rambam? How does the Rambam interpret the Bryce in Eilchin? So the Rambam in there are options that it means the fee minion. It's a shana lefi the mechira, not a shana lefi minion oilam, and also that you the chodesh ibo, that the chodesh ibo is counted, and maybe it means miyoim liyoim. You don't count shows. I'm reading to you a Pirush Mishnah in Eilchin Rambam, Perek Tes Mishnah Gimel. V'chacham oimim ki omu yis'ala shana hi shnei mosa chodesh miyoim liyoim miyoim liyoim. V'omu Tamimo lohavia ibo. So he has miyoim liyoim, shnei mosa chodesh, and chodesh ibo. The Achronim talk about this back and forth, what the Ram held or what he doesn't hold. The Rikukis, Kesef Mishnah, Mekeves HaMishnah B'chayis, Perek Aleph Halacha Gimel, the Ogodol, and Mishnayis, and Eilchin, Perek Tes, Mishnah Gimel, and the Derech HaMunim B'Alocha. I'm not getting involved in this, but clearly I think the Ram Pirush Mishnayis learns that it's something of Miyom, and you don't need shows. There's even an issue of shows in Beinu Abbas of Gadlus. Is the bar mitzvah at the beginning of the day, of that day you were born, or the bar mitzvah is Mishah L'Shah? Okay? And just to tell you, Reb Gershon Zichaynu L'Vocha, Gershon Zak Zichaynu L'Vocha, he told us a story that on the Shabbos of his, just to show you what the matzav in America was, is Reb Hillel, his brother Zecher Levacha, was bar mitzvah that Shabbos, okay, and they had 9 for Mincha, Shabbos afternoon, without him. Okay, and he was the 10th, and it was Miyoim Liyoim, but not Mishah L'Shah. So Reb Gershon didn't tell us what exactly they decided, but there was the Rab Aaron Kotler Zechaynu L'Vocha and Rab Mendel Zaks Zechaynu. They were mafalpa on what we should do over here. But you understand, that was what they had. Rab Aaron Mendel wasn't a million for Mincha, only with the tziruf of Reb Hillel. Okay, right. Now, next. Could be, now let's see the possibility. Who Omer Yis'ale v'ish ki mocher beis Moshav ir Chayma. So you look at the pasuk, it says like this: v'ish ki mocher beis Moshav ir Chayma v'hoyse gulasoi ad toim shnas memkoroi. Yomim tia gulasa v'im lo yigoyel ad mlois loishona tmimo v'kom. It happens. V'kom, the bayis stands up. There's not a mitzvah in the bayis. Asher boir, asher lo yichaymo latzmises lakrina ois ledoyosam lo yetze bayovo. So the question is, basically, maybe this is a shrana. And here, if you look at Hilchos Shmita v'yovo in the Protei Mitzvos, the mitzvah is din potei ori chayma, as you would expect it to be. And maybe that's why Minyan HaKotzer, the poil is lihiyos, which he uses many times when there's no clear command, it's lihiyos. And it's interesting, it becomes very strange what exactly happens here, because the Rambam clearly here uses the verb amal, which is a clear command. But I'm not sure how much you could take from that, because in all the mitzvahs of Tumah, he uses the verb amal, the Arabic verb amal, which is no clear command. It's sharano, and also in Aforos L'Dolim, he goes back and forth. So I'm not sure exactly when to be medayik and when not to medayik. And he says himself here, u'mitzvazu hu din botei oichayma. And the Rambam himself says in Sadi Hey that any mokim where he says that the mitzvah is the din, he says the mitzvah is lodun, to do, I guess, to work out according to the halachic framework and to do exactly what the Torah requires. Whether it is, there should be, or I can imagine also the Afora, that sometimes the Afora's Nedorim is Chal and of the Av, and sometimes it's not. So you're doing according to the Torah. Next, Kuf Mem. Kuf Mem, I guess we'll start it. I'm not sure we'll probably won't finish it. Mitzvah of Sfira, but not Sfira Sa'ime, Sfira of Yovel. Okay? Let's just see what happens here. Says the Rambam, HaMitzvah Arboim Umeir, Hi Shetzivonu Limnois Hashonim Sheva Ad Shnas HaYovel. 7. Okay? And then he says, we'll have to see this more because the 7 is not clear till soon. Achar Shenichba Sha'oretz, after Kibush Eretz Yisrael, v'his gabalnu bo. V'his gabalnu bo is a very strange translation of a verb. It here is also the Arabic word umalchana, which is the malachana. Okay, we had alamach we had before, which means our kinyan, our hachzaka in the kalka. So he's talking about after kibush and chazaka, which really is referring to zayin shekibshu and zayin shechilku. And the chilku is the chazaka, you get your chelik in the kalka. The Rambam in Shemitah v'Yovel, Perek Yud Halacha Aleph and Beis, Mitzvas Aseh Lispo Sheva Shonim, Ulekadosh Nasa Chamishim, V'chulei, Me'emosai Hischilu Limnois, Me'achra Arba Esrei Shona, Mishi Konsul Oret, Shenema Shei Shonim Tizra Sadecho, V'Shei Shonim Tizma Kamecho, Ad Shiyeh Kol Echod Makir Es Artzai. A bona fide kinyan, a clear, obvious kinyan. V'sheva shonim also b'kibush, poets. V'sheva shonim b'chiluk. Okay, now, u'mitzvah zo, kloima, sviras shnei shemitah. Okay, we'll see what that is, the Shnei Shemitah. He nimseres lebezdin. And then he's very clear about it. Kloima Sanhedre Gedola. Ki heim Sheyimnu shona shona. You do it one at a time. Mechamishim shona. Kmo sheyimnu ish ish mimenu yimei ha'omer. And the Rambam here refers to Sfiras ha'omer, and the mitzvah Sfiras ha'omer refers back to Sfira from Yovel. V'omo yis'ale v'safarte l'cho sheva shabsei shonim. V'loshin sifra, and here's very important, just to give you an idea, because we're not going to finish this. Yochol yispo sheva shmotim zo achazo. You know what the zo achazo means? V'yase yovel tamaloima sheva shonim sheva pomim ho'ad sheyomu shnei ksuvim v'im lav lo shamanu kloima shemitzvah zu lo higiu echos asiyasa. What's the definition of the mitzvah? Ele b'shnei ksuvim, 2 psukim. V'hu shenimna hashonim b'yichud, you count years. V'nimna shvuos imoim, you count 7 years and you count years. It's like the same way in Svira, so you count days and you count weeks. Here also you count years and shmitim. V'nimna hashvuos imoim. Gamkein, so 2 parts to it. The acha she'omo shezeh ha'inyan lo higia el mishnei ksuvim. It's the Chazal are apologizing. Chazal are apologizing that you need 2 ksuvim to make it. So if it's 2 separate mitzvahs, what do you have to apologize? It's 2 ksuvim. Make the shonim and the shmit. The shmitim is 2 separate mitzvahs. Shehem mitzvah achas behechrach. She'ilu hoyu shtei mitzvahs kloima minyan shonim uminyan shmotim lo yoyma ha'ad shelo yoyma shnei ksuvim. You don't have to apologize about anything. Ki chen kol shtei mitzvahs yilumdu mishnei ksuvim. Derech agav, maybe I should leave you see, the question is, you're not sure about the counterpositive. I'll explain to you what I mean. In other words, if you have 2 psukim, if you imagine 2 psukim, you can imagine that it's 2 mitzvahs, and you can also imagine it's 1 mitzvah. If Chazal apologize, it's 1 mitzvah. However, is the opposite possible? Can you imagine 2 mitzvahs from 1 pasuk? Or that's the basic unit of a mitzvah is a pasuk. However, if you have 2 disparate psukim, then you can ask yourself a question: is it 2 mitzvahs or 1 mitzvah? And this is a very important question. In Sefer HaMitzvos, if you want, I can talk about it a little bit next week. But it's not really clear. There's a proof here that maybe you cannot learn out 2 mitzvahs from 1 pasuk. But it's the opposite is certainly true, that if you have 2 psukim, you could have 2 mitzvahs, or maybe 1 mitzvah. Now, so here, the question is, Sanhedrin Agadol, in what capacity are they coming? Why does the Rambam mention this in Perek Hey Sanhedrin? The pasuk says v'safalta l'cha in the singular. Why do you assume it's Bezdin? Is only based on the Teres Kohanim, or it's based on other things? And in Mitzvah Hashem, we'll pick this up next week. bli neder.